I think Kenyans need to understand that a lot of the voting has already taken place. I think Kenyans need to also understand that tomorrow is not or today in America is not a public holiday. Many people have already voted. We now have early voting, which was not the case 20 years ago. Also, for example, our absentee voting system is very extensive. I voted by absentee ballot, as did my wife. I think we need to understand that the presidential race, which is what we are focusing on, is as important as it may be. The real races that we need to look at are for senators, what are called the down ballot positions. There are any number of governors' races up for grabs. But also the Senate is extremely important because currently the Republicans control the Senate, and there is a vacancy on the Supreme Court. If the Democrats take control of the Senate, the next justice will be nominated by, well, the winner of today's race. And I've already been on record as saying that I believe Hillary Clinton will, in fact, be the winner. And I said that this morning on KTN, Morning Express, so I've already committed myself. But the point really is that if she is the winner and the Senate becomes Democratic rather than Republican, it means that the next Supreme Court justice and the ones who follow will be appointed by Mrs. Clinton, by President Clinton. And that sets the tone for American law and American justice for the next 20 or 30 years. So that is a very key development to watch out for. Well, the Electoral College meets in December to elect the next president of the United States. The Electoral College is something that we've had since our Constitution, 1783 and then 1787, and it is designed to ensure that America does not become what's called a mobocracy. That is, we have a republic, we have checks and balances. The Electoral College is based on the census figures in each state, which is why there are very often contested results in our census collections, which are held every 10 years. When you take a census in the United States, that determines how many congressmen you're going to have from each state. Every state gets 2 senators. It's the number of people in Congress that shifts around and changes. As a result, in California, I believe now there are 54 or 58 electors. You don't know who they are, but when you vote on the Democratic column, in New York State, for example, where I voted, or my absentee ballots from, it said the electors of Hillary Clinton, Tim Kaine, whomever. Now they will meet. Most states, it's whoever has the largest amount of popular vote, where it's first past the post. If you get 40% and the next opponent gets 35%, you get all of those electoral votes. Some states, however, apportion them, but it's not uniform across the United States. And once again, that is in keeping with the fact that every state runs its own affairs, and that although we do have general rules governing the holding of elections, it's not necessarily uniform from state to state. Electors also do not have to vote for the candidate they are notionally sitting there to vote for. If you can look at it, and particularly in this election with Donald Trump, the Electoral College is the last speed bump to a Hitler. It's the last speed bump to a Mussolini in the United States. The electors do not have to vote for the person that notionally they should have. We saw this once, I think in 1996, when one of the electors voted Libertarian instead of for the Republican candidate. He didn't vote for Bob Dole. And everyone said, well, how's that? The electors are citizens whose job it is to make a good choice, the best choice under the circumstances. It's never happened, however, that the electors have not voted for the presumptive winner. But it's an important issue, and very often it's used to demonstrate why the United States is not democratic. In other words, why do we still have this sort of archaic system? Who are these people that we vote for? I think it's very interesting to note, however, that most of the criticism of the Electoral College generally comes from the Democratic Party, and particularly from the liberal or left wing, the Bernie Sanders part of the party. So I think now they're not that upset. Another aspect of voting in the United States is that only about 50% of eligible voters are registered to vote. And of that 50%, well, less than 50% often come out. So we can have a president elected with 12.5% of the total electorate. We have to also understand that our devolution started during the Revolution, and our states have a lot of important powers and run a lot of their own affairs. So in other words, the president is important, but the president can do very little given all the checks and balances in our systems. That is, Congress having to get the funding bills that come out of the House of Representatives, the Senate, and then we have the Supreme Court. What's been interesting about Obama has been his ability to get a number of important domestic programs actually passed during his 8 years. And in fact, the Republicans have been trying to stop him on almost every program he's wanted to introduce, and have been more or less successful, except for affordable health care, and also kind of, I think a lot of the civil rights issues have gotten a lot better play. Or let's say that the Republicans have not been able to exert a lot of pressure on things like abortion and the rest. I think the only people who are really surprised are the people outside the United States. That we have a notion of somehow that America is colorblind, gender blind, and this is obviously not the case. This has never been the case. We're all human beings, and when you talk about xenophobia, you have a situation where older white males, it seems, with less education, feel threatened by people who are different colors, different races, different nationalities, and I guess younger. The problem is that all of our ancestors came from elsewhere. It would be very difficult for me to be xenophobic about Mexicans, for example, when my relatives came from Russia and Poland in the 1890s, 1900s, and moved to New York for a better life. America is full of contradictions, as are many countries. Our contradictions are spread out across about 340 million people, 50 states, a number of territories, and usually don't get the airplay that has happened during this election. We have not had a candidate like Donald Trump as the candidate of one of the two major parties saying some of the most outrageous and actually disgusting things and getting away with it. And continuing to maintain his base, where you could talk about gender rights. Well, that is not necessarily accepted across the board in the United States. There is a perception, perhaps, that the United States is some sort of liberal fantasy land, but that's not the case. There's still significant, sometimes called cultural issues over gay, lesbian, transgender types of relationships. We are still, many of the Republican candidates who were running against Trump were all uniformly against abortion. They all uniformly wanted to defund Planned Parenthood as if that is the most vital issue in the campaign. They were playing to some obviously large part of the electorate who actually believed that a Supreme Court decision in 1972 is the most important aspect of America now, to repeal that, to overturn it. We have issues of gun rights, where the Constitution never, in fact, said you can have as many guns as you want in your house. The Constitution said you should be in a militia to protect the state. And we have massacres, and yet nothing ever gets done. And yet these are issues that foreign correspondents, foreigners, and I've lived here for 35 years, so you have to understand that having been out of the United States for a long period of time, I don't understand necessarily what's motivating many of the supporters of Trump. I don't understand why women would still be supporting Trump. I also know, as I've gotten older, and having been a very right-wing Republican in my youth, that you're notionally, if you start seeing how everyone benefits from government, how you get a check, maybe I would get a check, what we don't like is that somebody else gets an entitlement check. So I think Trump is vocalizing the resentment, the sense of loss, and the anger. But we've seen that in the past in the United States. We've seen that, for example, in 1968 with George Wallace, who was a segregationist candidate. And he attracted many of the voters who would have been with Robert F. Kennedy in the voting Democratic until Kennedy was assassinated. But Kennedy also, Robert F. Kennedy, without appealing to the baser notions of white Americans, he spoke to their fears. He spoke to how blue-collar Americans felt left out. I think if a Trump victory to Africa, there would be no difference. It makes no difference. In other words, I don't think he's given any consideration to trade, development, economics. I think, as with many people who criticize American foreign assistance, if he were to look into it, he would find out how many American companies benefit by supplying our USAID programs overseas. I also don't think he would spend much time thinking about it. There are also large constituencies in the United States that do depend on foreign trade, that depend on a host of federal government projects and programs. I don't think it would change. I don't think it would even change the security aspect of American relations, particularly in this part of the world. The implication of a Clinton victory will be that things will get worse up in Somalia, and they will get worse along our border with Somalia. Things will deteriorate in Yemen. Keep in mind that when Hillary Clinton, and this is Barack Obama's foreign policy as well, whether it was pulling out of Iraq at the end of 2011, going back in, doing nothing on Syria, one way or the other, getting rid of Gaddafi without planning for what happens after, watching Yemen deteriorate into chaos until we had to withdraw our 100 Green Berets and our embassy was shut. If you look at what's been going on in Somalia, where we have a policy of just stabilizing the country, which means basically Somalis get killed without ever getting a handle on the situation, this will get much worse. Hillary Clinton is a hawk in our global war on terror. And our global war on terror, as long as it keeps the American homeland safe, bad luck for everybody out here. Bad luck. We have now developed in the last 15 or 16 years a foreign policy which is based on never putting our boots on the ground for more than 15 minutes. That is drones. We send SEAL Team 6 and commandos. We train, assist, support. But small units of special operators. Very fine troops. Nothing wrong with them. But we don't stay. We turn it over to the locals, supposedly to do whatever. And then we walk away, and then we'll come back with our drones. And this is what has been going on under Obama, and very different from the situation where we did invade Iraq. Now, obviously, the Iraq invasion, not so much obviously, but we had under George Bush, there was a notion that somehow the Iraqis, after not having democracy for 40 or 50 years, would take to it like ducks to water. And then but Obama was against that war. Fair enough. He ran against that war, and he said, I will be withdrawing U.S. troops on December 31st, 2011, because he was going into a 2012 election. And he did that. And then within, a year and a half, 2 years, the Iraqi government, the army that we supposedly had trained and assisted, collapsed. He had to rethink his plans about Afghanistan, and we still have nearly 10,000 troops in Afghanistan. A lot of what Obama has been doing in foreign policy this year is essentially avoiding committing more troops, and yet we are still sliding into Iraq backwards. We are sliding into Syria, and we are becoming increasingly committed to a no-win war in Afghanistan. I understand that the notion of putting large numbers of troops into a place like Somalia for 5 or 10 years with a clear mission That may never happen. But that's really bad news for the Somalis, and that will not change under Hillary Clinton. We can expect more and more cooperation and assistance being given to the security forces in countries like Kenya, regardless of the outcome, regardless of how well they use our equipment or our training. Because the U.S. government, it's not the job of the U.S. government to question what local governments are doing.